I can't say I've solved the mystery of our arch, but I have a guess. Perhaps you'll find it interesting, too. This gloomy passageway through a residential building could have some ominous name. For example, the Cursed Arch, or the Arch of the Dead. Not really. Both are only fit for children's horror stories. It was probably not for nothing that this place was simply called the Arch. Almost no one from the locals walked through it. It was a bad omen. The residents of the building weren't too lazy to trudge around, especially in the evenings. The old women would gossip. Come on, old women. Seemingly intelligent people would pass on all sorts of nonsense to each other. And my own grandfather, who lived in this very building, believed that this arch was satanic. That building was built in 1939, and they say all sorts of crazy things started happening almost immediately. One day, one of the townspeople met a soldier in that arch. Half his face was burned, one arm was bandaged, his tunic was completely greasy. The soldier was smoking a cigarette and looked so contented, so smiling, as if his wounds didn't bother him. The townsman's mouth dropped open in amazement. Where would a soldier come from in such a small dead-end town? Why did he look like he'd been to war? The man started telling everyone about this encounter, but no one believed him. And a year later, the war began. Many guys from our town were called up to the front, and many funeral notices came to our town afterwards. This story is familiar to everyone. Even those who don't know about the arch have heard of the wounded soldier at least once. And here's a more recent story. Aunt Annie was walking home from the store. Her bags were heavy. Her legs weren't young anymore. She cut through the archway, and Josh, Elizabeth's son from the house next door, came running toward her. He was sweating, his backpack heavier than he was. "Hello," he called to Aunt Annie as he ran. "Hello," Aunt Annie replied, minding her own business. She stepped out of the archway and nearly had a heart attack. The boy had been buried 2 weeks ago. He drowned in the pond at the quarry at the end of September. Aunt Annie nearly sat down on the pavement when she remembered it. Or maybe it wasn't him. Who could I mistake him for? He was the only one so thin, so small, with freckles. These rumors reached his mother, who was already grieving. So she started going to that archway. She would come and stand there for hours. She completely lost her mind. When her husband found out, he dragged her home and started making a scene. She never came out again. Less than 6 months later, she died. They say she was always weak at heart. They gossip. And then Granny Amelia came the next summer. She never believed the rumors. Granny Amelia turned into an archway and saw a familiar figure in the darkness. The woman stood there, sobbing. Granny Amelia stopped, confused. This couldn't be true. "Elizabeth, is that you?" she asked. "I'm Granny Amelia," they answered. "What are you doing here?" the granny croaked, her mouth dry with terror. "I'm waiting for my son, Josh," the woman replied. The granny turned and ran as fast as she could. She spent the rest of the evening going door to door telling the neighbors. And the next day, everyone was talking about how the late Tamara had stood in the archway waiting for her son. So why don't they meet there? How could they? The boy ended up in a good place, but Elizabeth didn't. She committed suicide. Where did they even get that idea? Sam is okay with her. He's already brought home another one. Ugh, it's disgusting. As a child, I also believed that this arch was bad. We'd go out with the boys to play soccer. We'd lay stones as if they were goals. If the ball went through the arch, then follow it yourself. But it's scary to go. But when I entered my first year, I became a stubborn skeptic and materialist. Any sign of superstition or religiosity in people began to irritate me. I now teased my grandfather every time I came over. He'd open the door for me and immediately ask, "Did you come through the arch?" "Through the arch," I'd answer. "You fool!" My grandfather scolded, looking me over as if checking to see if I had brought the devil with me. My grandfather was often unshaven. He wore a long striped shirt. His head was completely white, but his hair was still thick. When I was little, my grandfather told me many stories about the arch, and sometimes dirty jokes too. Sometimes he even sang obscene songs to the accompaniment of a guitar. Grandma would hit him in the face with a towel so he wouldn't spoil the child. My grandfather felt lonely when Grandma died. He loved her deeply, with a touching old man's love. "Grandpa, come on, explain to me. The arch, as you say, is where the dead appear. What does a soldier have to do with it? There was no war then, so he couldn't have died yet," I teased the old man. Sometimes I'd even want to argue with my grandfather if he didn't tell me his weird stories for a while. "Do you think it's them?" "It's not them at all," my grandfather replied seriously. "Who?" I laughed. "Demons," my grandfather whispered to me. "Have you seen the cat?" "What cat?" "The one lying on the grate." My grandfather was referring to the ventilation grate in the arch. It was in the wall, in a special recess, like a window. Indeed, a gray cat with a black spot around its eye often lay there. "So what about the cat?" I asked. "A demon," the old man replied, pointing his finger at the floor for some reason. "When I was young, like you are now, there was a cafeteria next to the house, and that's where they fed that cat. And he was lying in the archway warming himself." "Cats don't live that long, Grandpa," I reminded him, as if not understanding where he was going with this. "Well, he died a long time ago. I buried him myself, over there where the playground is now." The old man nodded toward the window. "Grandpa, why are you telling me about a movie?" "I saw that movie about a cat who came back to life," I said, regretting having brought up the subject. "He's a different cat." "It's the demon that turns into a cat." "And that soldier wasn't a soldier. Why was he smiling? He was happy that war would soon take many lives. That makes demons happy." "There's the cat, the little devil. Sometimes he's small. Sometimes he's decrepit and mangy. Just touch his tail. The tip of his tail is broken. And that, the living cat's tail, was broken. Now he only sits in that archway. Why doesn't he walk outside, do you think?" "How do you know that if you never go through that archway yourself?" I asked. Grandfather didn't answer this question, only jokingly threatening to rewrite his will. I was listed as the heir to his apartment. Such property is not to be envied. The house is old. The ceiling in the kitchen sagged. You can't hammer a nail into the wall without sand falling out. All the residents dreamed of moving out of that building. Grandfather often wrote to the administration, and all they got in return was promises. He never got his apartment. He died 2 years before moving into the new building. And then one day, early in the spring, Grandpa was gone, but the house was still standing. I was walking through the archway as usual. It was damp and dirty. I saw a red glove lying in a puddle, a woman's glove made of thick fabric. I picked it up, shook it dry, and placed it on the ventilation grill so its owner would see it right away if she was looking. Then I walked out of the archway and turned onto the street. A middle-aged woman was walking towards me in a black coat. One hand was in her coat pocket, the other clutching the handle of her purse, which was slung over her shoulder. And immediately her red glove caught my eye. It was exactly the same one I'd picked up from the puddle a minute ago. "Are you looking for the glove?" I asked her. "It's there, lying in the archway on the ventilation grill." "What?" The woman stopped and looked at me intently. She looked puzzled. "Have you lost your glove?" I asked doubtfully. The woman took her hand out of her coat pocket, and on her other hand was a red glove. "No, here are my gloves," she said, removing them from her hands and examining them carefully, as if making sure they were still there. Then the woman looked at me suspiciously. Did I want something from her? I quickly apologized. The woman muttered something under her breath and moved on. I watched her go. She didn't put her gloves back on, but stuffed them in her pocket, and one of those gloves dangled precariously. As I expected, the woman turned into the archway. She didn't lose her glove, but she's definitely going to lose it now, I thought then. And then a hunch occurred to me, one that could explain both my experience and all these eerie stories. Perhaps time flows differently in this archway. What if there's, what do you call it? A crack in reality. That's why people from different times sometimes meet there. None of them were demons or the dead, but living, real people. And that cat, just an ordinary cat. He'd gone through the archway while he was alive and ended up here in the future. And that soldier was smiling, happy to be back home alive, but all this is just my guess. There's no way to verify it now. That house was torn down a couple of years ago, and the spot where it stood is overgrown with weeds. No one talks about the dead anymore, and I never saw that cat again.